सिन्दूरारुणविग्रहां त्रिनयनां माणिक्यमौलिस्फुरत् तारानायकशेखरां स्मितमुखीमां मीनवक्षोरुहां पाणिभ्यामलिपूर्णरत्नचषकं रक्तोत्पलं बिभ्रतीं सौम्यां रत्नघटस्थरक्तचरणां ध्यायेत् परामम्बिकाम् सान्निपातिकज्वर सततज्वर विषमज्वर ग्रह नक्षत्र दोषाञ्चान्या हर हर काली सर सर गौरी गम गम विद्ये आले माले काले बन्धे भज भज विद्ये मख मख विद्ये नाशय नाशय पापम् हर हर दुःस्वप्नम् विध्वंसय विध्वंसय विघ्नविनाशिनि रजनी सन्धे मुन्दुभिनादे मानस्तोषे मानसवेदे शङ्खिनी चक्रिणी वज्रिणी गदिनी शूलिनी अपमृत्युविनाशिनी विश्वेश्वरी द्राविडी केशवदैते पशुपति सहिते भीममर्दिनि धमनी कामिनी शबरी विराटी वाजक्ती ॐ द्रं 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 ॐ द्रं गुरु गुरु
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste, dear friends, and welcome once again to the 40th day of the Global Festival of Yoga celebrating wellness. The theme today is going to be really about wellness, but for those who have a certain difficulty already from a psychological point of view. So the session that we will have before us is on the use of meditation and yoga with psychiatrist or psychopathological patients. And the topic is going to be presented to us by Dr. Jacques Wien. Dr. Jacques Wien, may I request you to kindly come on screen? Would you like to kindly switch on your video? I'll take this opportunity to welcome him. It's a great honor for us to have Jacques on this program with us, because he is a widely sought after teacher who travels a lot in Europe, and also he has spends a lot of time in India in an ashram in near Almora in near Kankal. So, a little formal note about Jacques. Dr. Jacques V was trained as a psychiatrist in Paris and then left for India, where he spent most of his time for about 30 years. He lived about 25 years with Swami Vijayananda, who was a very close associate and the doctor of Ma Anandamayi Ma. So, Swami Vijayananda spent about 21 years, 29 years after that in the ashram, but he had a very close association of almost 31 years with Ma. And then Jacques was very fortunate to have spent many, many years in his company, and he was also, he got an Indian name from him, which is Vijnanananda. In the last decade or so, he has been a close follower of Tenzing Palmo. She is an English Tibetan nun who has made quite a few revolutionary contributions in the Buddhist circles. Yesterday, we had Alan Wallace with us, who spoke to us about certain Buddhist teachings, who was in the close company of Dalai Lama. Today, we have with us another scientist, yogi practitioner, Jacques V, who has had the good fortune of doing a long journey into the Indian sadhana, as well as being accompanied by the Buddhist teachings. A little more about Jacques. He has written 17 books whose thread is spiritual psychology, comparative mysticism, and the link between meditation, psychotherapy, and neurosciences. He's also a doctor, a psychiatrist. He is a spiritual guide as well as a meditation teacher. Currently, he is in a tour of meditation seminars and lectures in France and around. His main reference in meditation are Raja Yoga, Vedanta, and Buddhism. There's a lot to say about him. Every time he travels to France and in different parts of Europe, he has many students who reserve their dates long in advance to listen to him share his experience and wisdom, because he does that wonderful bridge between science and spirituality. So we're very fortunate that he's going to share with us on a very important topic on how meditation can be used for patients with a psychiatrist or psychopathological problems. Just a last point about him. He has also been involved in a lot of humanitarian work in India, where he supports various schools for normal as well as differently abled children. He does this in India and in certain parts of Nepal as well. So his work continues. He tries to uplift people wherever he goes. And we are very fortunate that he's going to share a few words from his past experience with us today. So Jacques, over to you. We look forward to this.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste from France. Okay. So to start, I am happy to hear that Alan Wallace was with you just recently, because we are translating one of his main books into French, The Attention Revolution. He asked us to translate this book, and we are 5 people collaborating. And tomorrow, I was thinking to finish my part and to send it to the one who will synthesize the work. So he's very interesting. I was with him for a 1-week seminar in Tushita in Dharamsala 2 years ago, and I continue to study some of his book. And so I did also a seminar on attention, where we commented his book, The Attention Revolution, for 6 times. Okay, now we can start with the subject. So there is a great development of research on yoga and meditation. And if you look, for instance, on the website, PubMed means Publication of Medicine, and you put the term yoga, there must be 5,500 studies, and with the term meditation, more than 6,000 studies. Of course, there is some overlapping in between the two. There are some studies on yoga and meditation, but still it proves that there is a great interest and work on this field. And so from a more specific point of view of psychiatry and psychopathology, we began by studying and using meditation for anxiety syndromes and depression, as well as for addictions. The first wave of study was transcendental meditation, and I did my PhD thesis in medicine with their work. There was at that time in '83 already 5 volumes of collected papers about their studies. And so they did a lot of studies. And after the 1995, the main contributor for studies on meditation, scientific studies on meditation, has become the mindfulness movement of Jon Kabat-Zinn. And particularly in 2004, the departments of health started to fund studies on meditation, especially of the mindfulness movement. And so it gives a great impetus to the progress of these studies. So what is probably a good sign is there are reactions from different people to this push of studies on meditation, and some people, so they are specialized in trying to show that meditation is very dangerous. There are many accidents, people get worse with meditation and so on. And of course, it's not completely false. There are cases like this, but still in general population, there are a lot of cases which are going badly. People think that maybe 15%, sometimes 20% of the population has psychiatric cases. So among people who do meditation, if there are some psychiatry, it's not a surprise also when you see the statistics. So one has to understand all that, and so without falling into conspiration-like thing, but we have three groups which don't like meditation. There may be the hard-nosed scientist, hardcore scientist, and some hardcore Christians also, because they feel that it's a competition, and also in the way the psychoanalysts, which are still powerful in some countries, and so they don't like meditation because it's a kind of self-analysis, and they see that as a direct competition. But still, studies are going on, there are progresses, and of course some studies, they were weak about the scientific rigor, and so now they try to improve. And so in US, it's very dynamic. For instance, there is a summer institute on the Hudson River just north of New York. And since 2005, when they started, they could collect $64 million. The figures are from 2016 or 17, so now it must be still more. So only for research on meditation. So it's not a small sum, $64 million. So they are very active to get the fund and get the job done. To speak of India, so I don't follow everything in India, but still I am in Hardwar, where is Swami Ramdev. And so they are quite active in the Patanjali Yoga Hospital in Baharpur, 10 kilometers from Hardwar. And they do a lot of studies, and they have someone who seems to have worked a lot in England, maybe he's English himself, and he has done 70 internationally published studies on meditation with different teams. So he's really a specialist of the subject and internationally recognized. So it's not like, you know, when I came 30 years ago in India, there were some ashrams where they were taking the blood pressure of people who were trying to meditate, and also the blood sugar level, and they were publishing articles with that, saying that meditation was relaxing. So now there have been many progresses, both in the West and in India, about these studies. They are much more precise. And what was a big revolution also was beginning of cerebral imagery, brain imagery, because with that one could see much more what was going on in the brain while there were emotions coming up or simply practicing meditation. And Mathieu Ricard, which is a French Tibetan monk close to Professor Richard Davidson in the University of Madison in Wisconsin, did somehow the supreme, tried the supreme gadget of scientific meditation. So he was trying different type of meditation, and he had before him the image film of his brain in 3D, three dimension, and he could see his brain, how it was functioning as on TV, but it was his own brain, and he was in the process of meditating. So it's somehow the ultimate gadget, see what happens in one's mind while we are thinking, while we are meditating. So I will found my intervention also. I am preparing a book with two professors of psychiatry in France. One is in adult psychiatry, the other is in child psychiatry. And the theme of the book will be psychiatry and meditation. So same theme, same argument with this, this lecture. And so we have started to work on this book, and to have you know, some analysis and synthesis about the 6,000 studies on meditation. It's good to have specialists who have already done their own synthesis. So there are very good books by Professor Andrew Newberg, including the recent one, 2015, How Enlightenment Changes the Brain. And for our topic today, we will be based on the science of meditation by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson. Daniel Goleman is a psychology presentator and specialist in the New York Times, and he's one who has discovered emotional intelligence. He did a book which is a bestseller. And when he was 20, he was already learning Vipassana meditation in Sri Lanka and in Burma. And so this meditation has accompanied him, and he did many studies on the subject and commented on studies done by others. And Professor Richard Davidson, so he is a specialist of brain and emotion, and also of brain and meditation. And so in their book, they distinguish three types of meditation. In the tradition, usually there are two types: meditation of observation, like in Vedanta or in Vipassana, or meditation of focalization, like in Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi of yoga, or like in Shamatha in Buddhism. And so here they distinguish three kinds of meditation. Meditation which are based mainly on attention, such as attention to the breath. It means anapanasati in Buddhism, concentration on a point, whether in the body or outside, or attention to a recitation like a mantra. So the second type of meditation are constructions meditations, such as complex visualizations of deities that are gradually developed, and usually one puts together in this visualization also mantra and feeling of certain part of the body. It's like the nyasa in the puja of Brahmin. Nyasa means sitting, so it's a sitting of image of God or of mantra in different different parts of the body. So somehow it's close to one of the main type of Vipassana, like Goenka's Vipassana, where there is a scan of the body and which has passed on in mindfulness meditation, which is much now practiced in the field of health. So the third type of meditation is deconstruction meditation, such as in Vipassana, which focuses on the impermanence of phenomena and also non-duality, in which one seeks to see behind mental manifestations by deconstructing them, and one sees through them a stable foundation of light and consciousness, means like Svaprakash, the light of the self in Vedanta. Now we will go into the details, because for science, details are important. Even for good meditation, one has to see the details. There is a English proverb which says the devil is in the detail, but one could say also God is in the detail. And you have in India Mamuleshwar, it's a name of Shiva, the god of small things, god of small beings also, but the god of small things. And it was the title also of Booker Prize book, The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. So we will take back the synthesis of Goldman and Davidson in the 350 pages book, The Science of Meditation. So they distinguish three levels: beginners, like 50, 100 hours of practice, cumulative practice; the middle practitioner, like 9,000, 10,000 hours of practice; and the full-fledged meditator, like 30,000 or 40,000 hours of practice. So mainly they are monks and hermits who did this level of meditation. So in beginners, with only a few hours, days or weeks of meditation, several favorable results can already be seen. Already, the brain shows less amygdala reactions to stress. The amygdala is the center that reacts to fear and threat. Improvements in attention after just 2 weeks of practice includes better focus, less mental wandering, and improved functional memory, with students showing much better concrete results in university entrance exams. Some results are also evident in the compassionate meditations field. They include improved connectivity in the empathy circuits, and afterwards, so there are improving in the inflammation factors, so there is less inflammation factors in the blood, and inflammation is a root cause of bone cancer and cardiovascular disease. Each of which kills 40% of the population. So with both, it kills 80% of the population. So anything that can treat it in the long term is more than welcome. It's definitely life-saving.
Jacques?
Even with a modest quantity of hours of practice, these benefits are likely to be fragile and need to be supported by daily practice sessions. Motivated meditators will say that if you can find time to meditate, you have to create it.
Sorry, Jacques, just one request from the participants.
Yes.
I want you to speak a little slowly, if possible.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, yes. There's a question of French accent, and moreover with a sound which is slightly distorted. It's, I know it's problematic.
Yes.
So I have an English text, and in one way or another, participants will be able to have it. And just now, a friend will reread it for the better language, but it will be available through the organization and Anuradha. So for long-term meditators who have completed about 1,000 hours or more of practice, the positive scientifically supported results compared to those found before are more robust, and some new ones are added to the mix. They are cerebral and hormonal indicators of reduced stress reactivity and inflammation, stronger neural circuits to better manage distress, and lower levels of stress hormone, such as cortisol, reflecting a generally reduced stress reactivity. Compassion meditation at this level brings a greater neural resonance with those who are suffering and a higher likelihood of doing something to help them. In this sense, a female bodhisattva in the Tibetan tradition, like Tara, is depicted with her legs crossed, with her right foot slightly forward, showing that she is ready at any time to bounce to help beings. The father of Tibetan Buddhism, Padmasambhava, is mostly represented in the same posture, with the right foot forward. When it comes to attention, there is a series of benefits of practice in the form of stronger selective attention, fewer attention gaps that diminish when one has to do a task for a certain amount of time, greater ease in sustaining attention, greater alertness to respond to anything that may happen, and less mental wandering. In addition to all this, with less thoughts obsessed by one small ego, practitioners have a weakening of the circuits related to attachment. One could say that the relationship between the prefrontal center that controls, for example, the prefrontal cingulate cortex, inside the center which activates mental chatter and is an integral part of the ego cerebral structure. So all that is it's a relationship between educator, and the educated child. In the beginning, it is rather strict. There is a lot of control, but as the child integrates the discipline, the educator can relax the control. So the educator is the prefrontal cortex, and the educated one is the place where there are so center of ego and of mental wandering. Thus, for beginners in meditation, the prefrontal activity is strong during the sessions. For more advanced practitioners, it becomes almost habitual again. And there is especially a prefrontal center which helps us to decide to be happy. And so for beginner meditators, this center is quite activated, but with very experienced meditators with 20, 30,000 hours of meditation, this center is just normal, so they don't have to decide to be happy because they are naturally happy with all the meditations they have done before. As they say, habit is second nature. Other changes in the brain include a slower respiratory rate, which indicates a slowing down of the metabolic rate. Someone who has meditated 10,000 hours, and especially someone who has done long retreats, will have a breathing cycle 1.6 times slower than someone of the same age and gender. The latter, over a year, will have about 800,000 more breaths than the meditator, which will not be good for his health. Even a single day of retreat increases the immune system, and the positive signs of meditative states continue to manifest themselves even during sleep. All of these changes suggest the emergence of altered traits in both character and long-term brain function. So at the beginning, it's just superficial change, but afterwards it becomes permanent, and it's what is called altered traits. Now we will go more into the details of yoga, meditation, and psychotherapy. A fundamental effectiveness of psychotherapy, which is clearly expressed in behavioral and cognitive therapies, but it will not limited to them, is desensitization. We put ourselves in a state of well-being that is as real and deep as possible, and we bring out an inner problem, for example, a phobia of black dogs. This causes us to feel tensions in one way or another. We then relax again and again by returning as quickly and as completely as possible to the state of deep well-being. And we start again by making the phobia more intense through imagination. This creates a new association. One deconditions oneself from the association between phobic image and muscle tension to obtain the opposite association between phobic image and relaxation. This contributes considerably to the healing process. In this sense, this feels like the well-being and healing effect induced by the yoga posture and the different forms of relaxation, breathing, and meditation. So what is called distraction when you practice yoga or meditation, in fact, is also therapeutical, because the association of the well-being of the state of meditation and of the distraction is healing distractions. That is important now about the new research about meditation and psychotherapy and psychopathology. From the point of view of scientific laboratory studies, over the last 5 years, there has been a rapid increase in studies on MBCT, mind-based cognitive therapy, which is a combination of mindfulness and cognitive therapies. Mindfulness favors a return to the body and very precise relaxing actions inside it, associated with a clear vision of mental images. Cognitive behavioral therapy is more concerned with the relationship with the outside world and already with the correction of awkward behaviors that maintain the pathology. In a more global vision, one could say that it has the role of the guru in the Indian tradition, who watches over the disciple and lets him to correct his erroneous behaviors. In both cases, this is in balance with the meditation itself. And that I check with 25 years of near my guru, Swami Vijayananda. He was correcting the behavior, definitely, in a very kind way, but still in a firm way. He knew what he wanted from me. Regularly, we tend, when we are meditating, to believe that we are at a higher level than the one we are at in actuality. The difficulties and unforeseen events of daily life regularly led us to return to reality. In France, I know Professor of Psychiatry, David da Fonseca, who is head of the whole psychiatric pole for Marseille, and who is also responsible for the Congress of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies for the southeast of France. He told me that every year, over the 3 days of the Congress, he reserves 1 day for meditation only. And so it's with him that we have worked 1 day, 2 weeks ago, for starting this book, Meditation and Psychiatry, in French, and maybe 1 day in English, why not? So now we came of about what said my master Swami Vijayananda, who practiced meditation for 75 years, including 60 years in ashram in India. And so he was first saying that to go deep into meditation, one should be adhikari. You know, so the one who speaks Hindi and Sanskrit, adhikari means ready. And so it's very important, and one could object that people who have psychopathology and psychiatry are definitely not ready for meditation. And I think it's true, but they are ready for preparation to meditation. And through preparation to meditation, they will have a lot of therapeutical effect. Preparation to meditation means education to concentration, and in psychiatry and psychopathology, mind is very much scattered, and so concentration is as important as reeducating walking capacity after road accidents, for instance, with people with bone fracture. And so it's quite important to see that like this. It's just because psychiatric and psychopathological patients, they have difficulty to concentrate, difficulty to have positive thinking, that one has to educate them more in this direction. And myself, I did it. I was for 4 or 5 years every day in psychiatric hospital, and I managed to teach some hatha yoga, some simple meditation technique, and adapting them to psychotic, to obsessional neurosis, to hysterical, to drug addiction, and so on. So what was saying very clearly my guru, so Swami Vijayananda, and Tenzin Palmo says the same, that the best psychology you could do is a psychology you do by yourself, on yourself, with meditation. That is a fundamental point. And a good therapy is a therapy which learns some kind of meditation to people so that they could continue by themselves their evolution. The psychotherapy, the end of the psychotherapy is not the end of inner evolution, and one has to continue with method of self-introspection through meditation. Secondly, my master explained that for him, yoga and meditation are a science because when you do the same experiments in the same conditions, you get the same results. And it's a kind of also a law of energy conservation. When that is the third point. When we unblock a physical tension with meditative attention, the energy that was trapped there starts circulating again and reaching areas of the body that were weak. And this allows us to heal chronic imbalances based on this weakness. And I associate it to a story of Indian religion, Hindu religion, is a story of the great-grandson of Sagar. And so they were with their uncle, and they disturbed the Rishi Vishvamitra, who became very angry with them because they asked a glass of water and he was his samadhi, and he was very angry when to be taken out of his samadhi for a glass of water. And so he sent them a curse to be closed up in Himalaya. Under the mountains, they were in prison under the mountains, the 100,000 sons of Sagar, of the Emperor Sagar. And so there was one sage, he decided so to meditate, to liberate them, and so and to make the Ganga go down in through Himalaya. And so by doing so, he got a special special mantra from Shiva, and he could do this feat to split the Himalaya with the Ganga. And it was a very strong effort, and they say in Hindi, Bhagirathi Prayatna, Herculean efforts, we will translate into English. And and what happened is due to this descent of the Ganga, the soul of the grandson of Sagar were liberated, and they could go to the heaven, and the rest of the body could go through the Ganga to Sagar itself, which means the ocean. And so behind this story is an experience of meditation. The descent of the Ganga is opening of the channels in the body, especially in Da, Pingala, and Sushumna. And the liberation of the grandson of Sagar is the liberation of tensions which are connected to all memories of curse, all memories of anger, all memories of avidity, of stupidity, and also transgenerational memories, and the errors of our ancestors are still in us, except if we do a deep work of meditation. So that is a good story which explains how it works in meditation and how meditation is therapeutical. So now we will speak more about psychopathology, so the effect of depression and anxiety. So we have so many studies on this subject that it's better to go directly to meta-analysis studies. So they put 100 or 200 studies together and they do an average of the results. So I found one very interesting because it's 2018, so for this meta-analysis is better if they are recent because they include the new studies. And with the team who did this study, there is Professor Richard Davidson who did this book, The Science of Meditation. And so I tell you the summary of what they find. So the subject of the meta-analysis was to mindfulness-based intervention for clinical symptoms of psychiatric disorders. So it's exactly the subject of our lecture. So they analyzed 142 randomized clinical trials with in all 12,000 participants. So it was a real big studies, meta-analysis of studies. They say afterwards that control conditions were coded on a 5-level system. So I don't know what it means, no problem. After treatment, mindfulness interventions were equivalent to evidence-based treatments and superior to other comparisons. So in clear terms, he did that, for instance, people who meditated to avoid the relapse of depression episode, they could avoid them with the same success than by continuing to take antidepressant drugs. Because antidepressant drugs have a lot of side effects, so this meditation cure, it's much better fundamentally. And so the most consistent evidence for mindfulness-based intervention has been found for depression, pain, smoking, and addiction. So you see depression, smoking, and addiction is psychopathology, and pain can be also connected to psychopathology, either because disturbed mind creates imaginary pains or because physical pains are so exhausting that they put you into depression. So now we'll go more into details, and of course we have no time to develop every details, but we will just mention one study of David Creswell. He is a big specialist of meditation on anxiety and depression, and he has noticed that for people who could not get better with meditation after a depression, they had no change in the activity and in the size of the insula. Insula is a center in the cortex which is responsible for managing all the messages of coming from the body and telling to other parts of the brain if there is some danger perceived by the body and so on. And so this was, they had not increased their insula, but people who could avoid the relapse into depression had increased their insula. Means they had understood this mindfulness meditation, they had understood, analyzed where were the tension connected to depression, and they could relax them, put energy in the other parts of the body which were connected with joy, and like this, changing durably their mood. So that is very important. Afterwards, so we will see in the text, I speak about sleep. I speak a lot about development of altruism, because when you look Indian way of thinking, means Buddhism, Vedanta, yoga, the big problem is ego. And so if you reduce ego in a sound and healthy way, you really improve everything in you, including psychopathology. So that is very important, and I develop it in my text that you will be able to read. So to finish shortly, a comparison between traditional meditation and Western meditation. So I have been 30 years mostly in India, mostly in a very traditional framework, means Manandamayi and Swami Vijayananda. And so, of course, there are differences in the way we do meditation in traditional ashram in India and in the way we do it with mindfulness in hospitals or in government places or in prisons in the West or in India also now. So we will distinguish 7 points. So in traditional meditation, there is a clear ethical position, and if it is not there, the energy acquired little by little through meditation efforts is also dispersed little by errors of behavior. It is like trying to fill a pierced bucket. Despite all efforts, the water level will not rise. So in traditional meditation, one insists about altruistic intentions. Meditating just for one's own well-being is a limited perspective that will yield limited results. The benefits of meditation are like rain from the sky. The image is from Manandamayi. It's available in very large quantities, but if you only have a small bowl and most of it, if you turn it upside down, you won't get any benefit. So that is people with strong ego who tries to meditate, their benefits are very small, except if they realize they have strong ego and they are able to dissolve it. So we can speak of a problem. Asking too much money while teaching meditation goes against this altruistic quality. Saying that medical studies were done to validate a form of meditation you are teaching is not an excuse to sell it as an expensive product. These look like billionaires who speculate on food prices and so create famine in poor countries. This analogy came to me just today, this morning. I was thinking about it, and this analogy came to me. Third point, deep-rooted faith and trust, not blind faith, but trust in this traditional work that has borne fruit for hundreds of generations. And this confidence is often not there with Western meditators. Personal guidance, so I wrote a full book on the Indian teaching tradition compared with psychotherapy. You can have it on my website. It's called the Indian Teaching Tradition, and my website is jacquesvigne.com. So even if you don't have a realized master, someone who knows much more than you in meditation can help you much. So again, devotion and love, it's not that one has to become bigoted, but if you study something, you have to love it. Now, community, we are equipped with mirror neurons, so we have a strong tendency to imitate. And if we have no community, we will imitate the general people whose level is not good. And so it's better to have a community to support us. And at the end, last but not least, the potential to develop transform traits. Neuroscientists now use this term. It is the crowning achievement of evolution, a stable transformation of the brain by the brain, of mind and behavior, in the right direction, of course. In this sense, I could call a Christian mystic, St. John of the Cross, who said, all friends of God can hardly deceive him anymore. Means they have changed in a stable way, and so they don't make mistakes and sins anymore. They are really stable in their friendship with God and with their ideal. So now we can exchange on these topics.
Merci beaucoup, Jacques. Thank you very much.
De rien, ma petite dame.
Thank you for sharing these very valuable insights as a psychiatrist and how meditation effects or has positive effects on such patients. We had a few questions, different kinds of questions, and I'll try and share some of them in the time that is there. So we have a question by Radharao ji who's saying that can meditation be done lying down? And if it is not possible to sit up, so if so, is it effective? Does the posture really affect the kind of meditation?
Okay, so before answering this question, I have put the exact title of this very good book, The Science of Meditation, so by Davidson and Goldman, Penguin 2017. So if you can have it, I think it's in ebook also. If you are into science of meditation, it's really a good reference. So about lying down, I asked this question to Tenzin Palmo, and she did the for 2 hours and a half, a strict traditional Tibetan retreat in her cave in Lahul Valley, where she didn't lie down. And so she knows what is it to meditate the whole night or to sleep just leaning on the wall, or they have meditation box, you know, in Tibetan Buddhism, so the knees are supported, the back is supported, but they don't lie down even at night. And so still she says that it's very important to be comfortable, and she has meditated, she has visited many meditation centers, including Zen centers in the West, and in Zen they insist about full lotus asana, Padmasana, and so she says it's not good, because people, they suffer for 20 years with their posture. And say it's not the aim of meditation to suffer with a posture. And so if you feel you can better go beyond body and mind in a supine position, it's better to do it. And so it's what says also Alan Wallace very clearly, and they say that French nickname him the supine man, because he likes very much meditating lying down, and so it helps to do also conscious dreaming and lucid dreaming. He's very interested in this, and it gives relaxation. It facilitates circulation of energy. But Alan Wallace says something very important. He says when you are meditating sitting, the attention in meditation is more physical, means you keep a good posture, and like this you have good attention. But we are lying down, there is no question of good posture, it's only psychological. So you must develop the capacity of inner decision to stay awake. So that is a very different, interesting difference.
Yeah, very interesting insight about the effect of posture on the
Yes,
on the consciousness through which meditation takes place.
yes.
Interesting. We have quite a few questions by one of our very regular participants, Ramakrishnan Sitaramanji, and he's saying that I have heard some people, including perhaps Dr. B. Alan Wallace and many Swamis, state that psychoactive drugs are not required for psychopathologies, and that yoga meditation alone is sufficient. What are your views on the utility of psychoactive drugs in therapy, both long and short term?
Yes, so it's a big question, you know, and it has already been discussed also with the difference between medicine in psychiatry and psychotherapy. And to be short, I think they may be very useful in acute cases, but in long term, one has really to find something else, you know. And just yesterday, I saw a young lady. She had a first acute delirium 2 years ago, and she did nothing except taking neuroleptic, and she was so anxious because she knew she had done nothing to understand what happened. And she came to the psychiatrist, and after 1 year and a half, she had no relapse. And so the psychiatrist said, okay, you have no relapse, now you can stop the drug. And 2 hours later, she was in the supermarket with her mother, and she started to again acute delirium, and she had to go to hospital again. 2 hours after seeing the psychiatrist, saying now everything is okay, you know. And she started a second episode. And when you start 2, 3, 4 episodes of acute delirium, you become schizophrenic. So it's a real problem, you know. And so now I have arranged, because we have in our group of yoga here a man who has been 35 years, both yoga teacher and psychiatric nurse. And so he will take, they are in the same area, so he will take her in charge because he knows both of them. He has seen for 35 years schizophrenic people, he's not afraid. While usual yoga teachers, they will be afraid, you know, if they start to cry or to shout in the yoga class, it will be a problem for others, for the yoga teacher, but himself, he has seen that for 35 years, so he knows how to calm them down and to bring them to more understanding. And so one can do many things, but better to know it, you know, if some psychotherapists or psychiatric nurse or psychiatrist, they know good yoga and good meditation, they can do a lot, or some yoga teacher, they can do a lot also, but they need some training additional training to work with these people. And you know, one should not be in a feeling of omnipotence because we do meditation and yoga. And so before, means 50 years before, when people started acute delirium, in 1 month they could be demented as much as people of 90 with the brain completely destroyed, you know. It was called in French, we say Vézanic dementia. I don't know if the term is also in English, but it's the idea that only out of psychic causes, the psychosis can make you as demented as someone who has a physical problem in the brain. And so, and it could come in 2 or 3 months, you know. And so now it's not to be seen because we give immediately neuroleptic. Neuroleptic, they calm down everything. And at least people, they don't aggravate, they improve regularly. But afterwards, they should understand what is this delirium, and same for depression. And so the best is to intensify practice of yoga and meditation when you feel depression or some delirium is coming, but and to combine with some very simple psychotherapy is very important in psychotherapy rather than seeing all the details of the past to the past to explain to the patients how their psychopathology work. There is a lot to understand about psychosis, about depression, about compulsive disorders, about food behavior disorders. There is a lot to understand, and so it's the role of the psychotherapist not only to listen to the past of the patients, but also to explain how it works. You know, because when you explain how it works, and after with meditation, you can make it feel everywhere in the body. That's a good combination. It's what is called MBCT, mind-based cognitive therapy, explaining and feeling in the body with meditation.
Yes, I mean, listening to you, one feels so grateful that when you have a mind that is functioning well and there are no pathological, you know, disturbances at the mental.
Yes.
It's such a grace that we take for granted. But
Yes.
and it's what I understood from your answer just now is that it's not always just a mental, you know, it's not just the fact that one is unable to control it because one's mind is not being applied there. There really is a biological source to some of these problems, and therefore one has to treat it very specifically.
Yes, so it depends, you know. In the bipolarity, where there is alternance of maniac fits and depressive fits, there is a disturbance and medicine help. But even in that cases, there should be a work of therapeutical education, understanding the signs of the beginning of excitation episode or depressive episode. So even in that cases, one can do a lot through meditation. For instance, I had known someone who was really, manic depressive. And one day he was trying to do some Vipassana, but at the beginning it was not working. And he came naked in the hall of the hotel because he was so excited and in delirium. So he had to go to psychiatric hospital several times. And lithium, which is usually effective for this disease, bipolar disease, was not effective in his case. But when he combined it with regular Vipassana, it was effective. So he continued both, and he could become himself a psychotherapist and Vipassana teacher, and he had no relapse for 30 or 40 years. But he was seriously bipolar, and lithium medicine were not effective, but he didn't left it. He combined lithium and meditation, and that was effective. Maybe he had given up lithium, he would have some relapse. So especially in these bipolar disorders, it's better to take some medicine. But for psychotic disorders, it's better to do real work on oneself, especially psychophysical work, means it's not only to understand mentally, one has to do some connection with the body. And that is the key, connection between body and mind, so specific words. For that, yoga is very good. The Tai Chi, Qigong is very good also. But just sport is not enough because there is not enough connection with the mind. And just mind techniques also are not enough because they are not felt in the body. Acha, no sound. I don't know what happened. Disruption. Now it comes back. Yeah, yes. Now it comes
So
back.
I said, thank you for that clarification. And there's another related question to what you just said by Ramkrishnan ji again. He's saying that are there studies on relapses after meditation therapy for psychopathological disorders? And if so, how does the relapse rate compare with that of pharmacological therapy?
So maybe you could repeat because I didn't hear
No. So he's just
clearly.
Yeah, so he's saying that you have already mentioned about the fact that there is maybe a lesser relapse that takes place when one is meditating versus if one is taking medicine. So his precise question is, are there studies on relapses after meditation therapy for psychopathological disorders? And if so, how does the relapse rate compare with that of pharmacological therapy?
Yes, so there are more and more studies on this, and so they said it in these recent studies of 2018 with Davidson and Simon Goldberg, and so meta-analysis of 140 studies. It works the best for depression and quitting smoking, quitting addiction, and anxiety. But now with a combination of cognitive therapy along with meditation, it works also for other type of disorders. For instance, I wrote a book about mental anorexia, and there are studies, very encouraging studies about mindfulness and anorexia. Because the problem of anorexia is not only that people don't want food, but they are confused about their appetite. They don't know if they are hungry or satiated. And there is a confusion between two centers in the brain. It has been objectified with mental imagery, brain imagery. And so it's important to clarify this, and to clarify this, feeling the body very precisely, very systematically is very important. So that's the role of mindfulness for this mental anorexia or even for bulimia. But bulimia is difficult to treat, even psychotherapy and whatever the treatment. If people have decided to really eat, it's very difficult to stop them. But still one can try.
So the question is that in the yoga tradition, there is a strengthening of the willpower of the individual. So
yes.
In patients with psychiatric problems, is it possible to develop that willpower? Is it possible to help them train the willpower and thereby overcome their problems, or how does it really work?
Yes, so definitely, and it's a big question. And you know, often, even for normal people, sitting in meditation may be difficult when you are anxious on a difficult time. So what they can do is to walk and to recite a positive formula like mantra or prayer or positive formula. And that is much easier and it's very effective because when you walk about half an hour, you have increase in endorphins. And endorphins are the precursor of serotonin, which is the most common antidepressant. So that is a natural way to fight against depression, to retrieve concentration, which is lacking in psychosis. And so meditative walking is very important. Moreover, if you do it with naked feet, you have this contact of the skin of the foot, of the sole on the floor. And it probably, it's like a caress, it increases oxytocin. And when oxytocin is increased, you feel much better. Relationship with others are much better. So the psychopathological side of your personality are much attenuated.
I mean, all of this really requires a lot of expertise. One cannot, as just like you mentioned earlier, just as a yoga teacher, it is insufficient to deal with people who are suffering from certain psychiatric problems, really. So one has to be better trained and
Yes, and also it happened now in modern world because people are less, I would say, racist. And so yoga teacher can really cooperate with psychotherapist. And so everyone contributes and if they dialogue and they can do really a good teamwork.
Thank you. We just have a question by Veronica G. She's saying, could you provide advice on how to guide a 19-year-old man leaving to first year college to foreign country? Very stressful change for a young mind. What type of meditation practice would you recommend?
Yes, so young people, they can do a lot of meditation and he should practice regularly and read about it. You know, it's very important to read, to know the main path of meditation and what works, what recommends tradition, and to have a practice in a group and with confidence in a teacher, you know, and he can try different groups. And and sometimes he should try to do retreat to really feel more deeply his mind. You know, retreats, they are like initiation. When for a young man, when he's for the first time full day meditation, it's a real initiation. He becomes more adult with that. Even for all people, if they have never been alone meditating for 3 days, well, the first time they do it, it's an initiation for them also, even if they are old in age.
So you would recommend that he finds a community or a group that is meditating so that he feels accompanied and safe with a good teacher.
Yes. It's better. It's better to
Desirable.
be guided, and but he has to work by himself. But he should have truthful people to ask his questions also. That's much better. You know, it's like learning a musical instrument. If you take bad habits, afterwards it's double work to be able to abandon the bad habits and to find the right one. So for meditation, it's the same. If you meditate too much by yourself at the beginning, you take bad habits, and afterwards it's difficult to give them up.
Okay, that was very valuable. I'll just take up a last question in the interest of time. And
Yes.
as you touched upon it lightly, you touched upon it briefly when you were speaking. It's again by Ramakrishnan ji, who's asking, what is the general attitude of French authorities to meditation therapy in public hospitals vis-a-vis the official policy of secularism? Is there some clear policy on this?
Yes, that's a good question. Myself, my last book was called practice of secular meditation, because I knew that in France they are very much tense about secularism, and so I wrote this book, and I explained that good secularism is not exclusive but inclusive, and so one has to be able to present meditation in a secular way, so that everyone could practice, even in prisons, in schools, in hospital. So, and afterwards, it doesn't prevent to go further with traditional meditation. So normally it should be complementary, and some people succeed in doing this. But there are resistances also, not only from materialist people, but from religious people also. Some Christians, they say meditation come from the East, so they will take our market shares, and so they try to attack and so on. It's not that simple, you know. But psychoanalysts also, they have a market share in the psychotherapy business, and so when they see meditation, it's a problem. But it's not new, you know. There was some tension between the Shramana and the Brahmana in all India. The Shramana were the ones who were working with meditation in the forest, like Buddhist, Jain monk or Shaiva ascetics, and the Brahmanas, they were more into rituals with the king in the town, in the capital. And so there were tensions in between them. And so it's the same now. We have religious people who are more into rituals, and some people come and say, no, you can be completely freed by direct meditation. And so the ritualists, they see the end of their business, and so they are not happy, you know. So, but still, if ritualists are intelligent, they could say, okay, some people, they can go directly through meditation. Some other people, they prefer to do some rituals as a support. But the question in actuality, the question is not new, you know. Shramana and Brahmana, it was at the time of Buddha, 25 years ago, 25 centuries ago, in India already, it was there.
Yes. So I think since you're also running out of time, I request Vinay to please come in and make the announcements.
So if you want, because we are on Zoom, I can send you the text, English text to everyone by the chat. Yes, I do this.
Please do that. So as Vinay is making the announcement, if you could please share the text on the chat. And in either case, we will upload it on the website. So many participants have been asking about, you know, maybe the text or the recordings of these sessions. All of this is available on the website, as well as the recording specifically will be there on the YouTube channel of Indica Yoga and the Facebook page. So please fall back on these references so that you can take more time to listen to them carefully and then benefit from all.
Yes. So there is a technical problem because maybe I am not the host, so I don't see the possibility to send. So I will send you by mail, and you can send them by chat afterwards.
We put it up on the website.
Yes, or put it on the website. Yes, no problem.
Vinay, may I request you to please come up and come in and make the announcements?
Thank you, Jacques, for that really insightful presentation, because this was one area that we had not looked into so far. So that was a very unique contribution that you made. Can I request Ramprasad ji to kindly show us the posters for tomorrow? So tomorrow we have yet another panel discussion session that would be on what would go into making of a Yogacharya program, because Yogacharya, Yogi, these are the names that people often use immediately after finishing a teacher training program. It could be just of 200 hours. Now we also have 100 hours teacher training program. And the moment they finish, people are very eager to have a title for themselves. So we would like to deliberate a little more on that and to see what all, if we need to have a program for a Yogacharya, what all should go in. So we have people from different perspectives who will be contributing. We have someone who will be sharing with us on what would be the Shastric understanding from the Shastra Parampara. We have someone for the Vedanta tradition, we have someone for the psychological transformation that needs to happen for someone who calls a Yogacharya. We have someone who will bring in the contemplative approach. We have someone who comes from the therapeutic approach, and we have someone also from the Ayurveda approach. So we have these 6 experts who will be deliberating upon what would go in the making of a Yogacharya program and how can these aspects be made part of it. Because at Indica Yoga, we also have this idea to soon offer a Yogacharya program. So we would like to hear from experts what all will go in the making of such a program. This is for the morning session. This will be the last panel discussion session of the whole festival. Tomorrow we'll be at the 41st day of the celebration, and it will be almost 111th session that we'll be looking into. And the evening, we have the valedictory session. In the evening, we have the valedictory session, and we'll have Dr. R. Nagaratna to lead the valedictory session. In fact, many of you had been asking us, we are discussing so much about yoga, but we are not able to see Dr. Nagendra and Dr. Nagaratna. In fact, these are the 2 big names in India when it comes to the field of yoga for the yeoman service that I have been doing for nearly 5 decades. We had Dr. R. Nagendra for the inaugural session. In fact, he had a video recorded a message and sent it to us. And for the valedictory, we have none other than Dr. R. Nagaratna, who will be delivering the valedictory address. And along with her, we will also have Harikiran Vadlamaniji, who will be present who will be presiding over the session. He is the founder of Indic Academy and Indica Yoga. Indica Yoga is a part of Indic Academy. There are many verticals like Indica Yoga under Indic Academy, and he will be presiding tomorrow. So these will be the 2 main resource people, and we'll also have all representatives from all our organizing partners. We had about 8 important organizing partners. 1 member from each of these partners will also be joining, and it will be a grand valedictory program for the 41-day-long Mahayajna that was started on International Yoga Day. With these, also that kindly do join in, share with others, and let's have maximum number of people who will be joining us for tomorrow, so that we'll be able to cherish this historic in many sense and also a memorable event. So this is the request from our side. And with this, I now go back to Dr. Anuradha and Dr. Jacques for the last words.
So may I just request Dr. Jacques to kindly give us the last words as a message that we can take back with us.
Yes. Should I say something? Yes, as a final word, a final message, I would say that it's quite important to develop 2 qualities, attention and altruism, or I could say also vigilance and benevolence, because when you think deeply about it, from these 2 qualities, all the other qualities are coming out. So through meditation, through yoga, if I can develop these 2 qualities, it will be good for our happiness and happiness of people around us and the society at large. Namaste.
So namaste and thank you very much, Lord.
Yes, namaste. Now I listen to you.
Gratitude for what you have shared with us, and we look forward to your association with Indica Yoga in the future as well. So thank you very much, and happy journey to your next destination.
Thank you, Hari Om.
Bon voyage et au revoir.
Au revoir, merci. Merci.